Australia is preparing a bold $200 billion project, turning part of its desert into an inland sea larger than France and Germany combined. Far from science fiction, this vision could create a body of water comparable to the Great Lakes. What makes it even more fascinating is history. Millions of years ago, the ancient Aral Sea once stretched across central Australia, home to remarkable marine life. Now the nation explores whether reviving a lost sea. For decades, Australia's inland sea proposals were dismissed as dangerous fantasies. But in the 2020s, the idea resurfaced with unprecedented seriousness. The reason was clear: the nation's water crisis had reached a breaking point. Since 2017, Eastern Australia has faced its worst drought in 400 years. This wasn't simply dry weather, it was the collapse of water systems on a continental scale. Tamworth, a city of 60,000, nearly ran out of water entirely. Storage tanks were 90% empty, and residents queued for hours as army tankers delivered drinking supplies from other states. Families washed from buckets, did laundry once a week, and children hadn't seen a full bathtub in months. In the smaller town of Stanthorpe, the crisis was even more severe. Its 5,000 residents had no running water at all. Each family was rationed to 100 liters per day, barely enough for cooking, drinking, washing, and laundry combined. People had to choose between bathing and preparing meals. Rural Australia faced devastation on another scale. Farmers slaughtered cattle by the thousands, not for market but because there was no water to keep them alive. Over 3 years, the national herd shrank by 10 million head, 1/3 of the total. Generational farms were sold off cheaply or abandoned, and families left lands their ancestors had worked for more than a century. As one New South Wales farmer said after shooting 400 cattle in a single month, "Not because I wanted to, but because they were dying of thirst. My family has farmed this land for 70 years. Now I'm the last one left." Then came the fires of 2019 to 2020, remembered as Black Summer. An area larger than Great Britain and Ireland combined was consumed. 3 billion animals perished: kangaroos, koalas, reptiles, and birds burned alive. Smoke rose 15 kilometers into the stratosphere, circled the planet, and darkened skies as far away as South America and Antarctica. In New Zealand, the sun turned red. In Sydney, the air grew more toxic than in Beijing during its worst pollution days. The toll was catastrophic. Economic damage exceeded $100 billion, entire towns were obliterated, and thousands of residents were forced into desperate escapes. In Malakuta, 4,000 people fled to the beach as fire encircled the town, waiting for military ships to rescue them. Temperatures reached 48 degrees Celsius, ash fell like snow, and the sky glowed orange and black. Australia's inland sea proposals were reborn not as eccentric visions but as a response to a nation pushed beyond its limits. Firefighters battled for months, but the fires only grew stronger. Moving at 80 kilometers per hour, they created fire tornadoes several kilometers high. Trucks melted in the heat, and helicopters were grounded by smoke and turbulence. Even major cities faced collapse. Melbourne imposed strict rationing of 50 liters per person per day, 3-minute showers, weekly laundry, and no gardens or pools. In Sydney, police fined residents for watering lawns, yet reservoirs still dried up. Warragamba Dam, Sydney's main supply, fell to 40%, its lowest ever. Engineers warned that if drought continued for 2 more years, the city of 5 million could run out of water entirely. Economic damage was staggering. Agriculture, long the backbone of exports, collapsed. Wheat harvest dropped 20%, cotton 40%, and dairy farms fled inland regions. Wine valleys abandoned traditional grapes for drought-resistant varieties, or gave up entirely. Tourism, worth $60 billion annually, lost billions as coral bleaching killed half the Great Barrier Reef and national parks closed for fire danger. Foreign visitors canceled trips over smoke and safety fears. Insurance and banking sectors buckled. Annual home insurance in some areas reached $20,000, higher than many mortgages, while banks refused loans in high-risk zones. Land prices in central regions plunged 70%. The human toll was the worst of all. Children in drought regions grew up without ever seeing full rivers. Climate disasters had become their norm. Against this apocalyptic backdrop, the idea of creating an inland sea returned with new urgency. What once seemed an impossible dream suddenly looked feasible thanks to a technological revolution. In the 1930s, engineer John Bradfield had only rivers to draw from, unpredictable and seasonal. Pumping required vast amounts of coal power, desalination was far too expensive, and salt buildup had no solution. Today, conditions are entirely different. Solar energy is now cheaper than coal, and Australia, one of the sunniest countries in the world, can power immense pumping stations at minimal cost. Advances in membrane technology have made seawater desalination affordable, with countries like Israel, the UAE, and Saudi Arabia already producing billions of liters daily. New processes extract minerals from seawater, salt, lithium, and magnesium, transforming waste into valuable exports. Most importantly, modern computer modeling allows scientists to forecast the climate and ecological impacts of such a project decades in advance. In 2020, the Australian Inland Sea 2.0 plan was launched. Unlike Bradfield's vision, it would rely on seawater rather than rivers, powered by solar rather than coal. Instead of fighting salt accumulation, the plan embraces it, extracting and selling minerals on an industrial scale. The design is straightforward. Massive desalination and solar facilities on the southern coast would pump water through a 600-kilometer pipeline to Lake Air. Kept constantly replenished, the lake would no longer dry up. Supporters argue the benefits go far beyond water security. A permanent inland sea would moderate the harsh climate of Central Australia, increasing rainfall, lowering temperatures, and creating conditions for agriculture. Solar-powered cities could rise along its shores. Tourism would thrive. Agricultural zones could expand using drip irrigation, and mineral processing plants would anchor new industries. The project could generate hundreds of thousands of jobs, draw international investment, and position Australia as a leader in renewable energy and desalination. The economic potential is vast. Lithium from seawater is vital for electric car batteries, while salt and magnesium feed global industries. Revenues could offset project costs. Solar arrays around the lake could supply all of Australia's power needs, with surplus electricity exported to Asia via submarine cables. Several countries have already expressed interest in purchasing clean energy, potentially transforming Australia from a fossil fuel exporter into a renewable superpower. New inland cities would also relieve the housing pressures of Sydney and Melbourne, where property prices have become unattainable for many families. Settlements around the sea could provide affordable housing and a new lifestyle in the interior. Most strikingly, the project is technologically realistic. Large-scale desalination is already proven. Pipelines of similar length exist in China. Solar installations of comparable size are under construction in the Middle East. Modern pumping systems can handle the required volumes. For the first time in history, Australia has both the technology and the motivation to bring an inland sea within reach. Enjoyed the video? Before we continue, don't forget to ring the bell, share it with your friends, and hit that subscribe button if you haven't yet. It truly helps me out, and I promise to bring you even more awesome content. However, serious questions remain that could doom this entire enterprise. The $200 billion price tag exceeds Australia's entire annual federal budget. These amounts require international financing and political stability maintained for decades. Pipelines of this enormous length are vulnerable to mechanical breakdowns, terrorist attacks, and natural disasters. The impacts on ecosystems remain fundamentally unpredictable. Even the most advanced computer models can make catastrophic errors because nature is extraordinarily complex. Saltwater infiltration may sterilize soil across vast areas around the lake, making agriculture impossible rather than enhancing it. There are also profound social justice issues. For the indigenous Arabana people, Lake Air is a sacred site of immense spiritual significance. They call it Kadi Thanda and believe the spirits of their ancestors inhabit this land. For indigenous communities, flooding the lake would be equivalent to destroying a cathedral. Elder Aaron Stewart stated, "Our stories are written on this earth. They cannot be drowned." The project raises uncomfortable questions about priorities. Australia's central regions are among the poorest in the country, especially for indigenous populations. Spending $200 billion on a mega project while people live without adequate housing, medical care, and education seems morally questionable at best. Critics point to alternative approaches that could be far more effective. For the same $200 billion, Australia could build thousands of smaller desalination plants distributed across the country, improve rainwater harvesting systems, develop advanced water recycling technologies, and invest heavily in drought-resistant crop varieties. This distributed approach would be less risky and more resilient to system failures. To understand why the inland sea idea keeps resurfacing, we need to go back to the 1800s. European explorers such as Charles Sturt ventured into Australia's interior expecting vast rivers or lakes. Instead, they found endless deserts. Sturt wrote in his journal that it seemed as if some great convulsion had torn these regions asunder. Still, the dream of water in the red center never faded. In the 1930s, engineer John Bradfield, celebrated for designing the Sydney Harbour Bridge, proposed redirecting floodwaters from Queensland's northern rivers into the Lake Eyre Basin, a depression 15 meters below sea level. His plan envisioned a 2,300-kilometer system of dams, pumps, and canals that would create an inland sea larger than Belgium. Bradfield argued it could cool the continent's climate, generate hydroelectric power, and open vast tracts of farmland comparable to California's Central Valley. The idea drew strength from Lake Eyre's unique nature. Normally a vast salt flat larger than England, it sits as Australia's lowest point. Most of the time it is a barren, sun-baked crust, but once every decade monsoonal rains transform it into a shimmering inland sea visible from space. For a few months, pelicans and other birds arrive in huge flocks to breed, before the water evaporates and the desert returns. Bradfield's vision sought to make this transformation permanent. Yet engineers soon identified fatal flaws. Central Australia's evaporation rates are among the highest in the world, 10 times greater than rainfall. Even with constant replenishment, the basin would quickly become hypersaline, toxic to most life. The costs were equally prohibitive, equivalent to tens of billions in today's currency. Most critically, there was no known method to prevent relentless salt accumulation in a closed system. Because of these challenges, Bradfield's proposal was shelved. But the idea never disappeared entirely. It resurfaced during the optimism of the 1960s, again in the 1980s amid new environmental debates, and several more times since. Each revival faced the same immovable barriers: extreme evaporation, technological limits, and staggering expense. For nearly a century, the inland sea lingered as one of Australia's most audacious unrealized projects. A vision of transforming desert into water, it remained beyond reach, too costly, too risky, and too technically challenging for its time. What do you think? If Bradfield's inland sea project had gone ahead in the 1930s, would it have been remembered as a bold success that transformed Australia, or as an environmental and economic disaster? Let us know in the comments below. The most devastating blow to inland sea projects came from one of the worst environmental disasters of the 20th century, the collapse of the Aral Sea in the Soviet Union. In the 1960s, Soviet leaders set out to turn Central Asia's deserts into cotton fields by diverting the Amu Darya and Syr Darya rivers away from the Aral Sea. The ambition was enormous: to make the USSR the world's top cotton producer, feed the country, and earn billions through exports. At the time, the Aral Sea seemed inexhaustible. It was the fourth largest lake on Earth, 70 meters deep and covering 70,000 square kilometers. It sustained 20 fish species, supported thriving towns like Aralsk and Moynak, and served as a hub for fishing fleets and tourism. Soviet engineers were confident. They built 40,000 kilometers of canals, including the 1,400-kilometer Karakum Canal, longer than the Great Wall of China. Hundreds of thousands of workers carved through mountains and deserts with explosives and machinery. For a few years, the results looked like success. Cotton fields expanded, cities grew, and the USSR became the world's second-largest cotton producer. But by the 1970s, signs of collapse appeared. The Aral's water levels fell, beaches receded, and salinity rose sharply, killing fish populations. By the 1980s, the sea had shrunk to half its size. Aralsk, once a bustling port, now sat 40 kilometers from the shoreline. Abandoned boats rusted on dry seabeds. The water had turned into brine, uninhabitable for fish or plants. By the 1990s, the disaster reached apocalyptic proportions. The Aral split into separate bodies of water. Vast salt plains replaced open sea, and winds carried toxic dust mixed with pesticides and fertilizers across the region. These storms poisoned millions, driving up rates of cancer, kidney disease, respiratory illness, infertility, and infant mortality. Entire communities were devastated. The economic collapse was swift. The fishing industry that had supported 60,000 people vanished. Towns like Moynac became ghost settlements in a salt desert, and populations across the region dropped as families fled. The environmental transformation was equally severe. Without the sea's moderating influence, winters became harsher, summers hotter, and rainfall disappeared. The once productive region turned into a barren desert. By the early 21st century, the Aral Sea had lost 90% of its volume. What was once the world's fourth largest lake had become the Aral Desert, a 40,000 square kilometer wasteland of salt and toxins. Satellite images showed the scale of the catastrophe, a once vast blue sea replaced by a gray-white expanse of dust. Climate change adds unprecedented urgency to Australia's situation. Droughts grow harsher each year, and during the 2019 to 2020 Black Summer, entire towns ran dry. Could an inland sea buffer against future droughts, or would it be an expensive Band-Aid on a bullet wound? No one knows for certain. If construction began tomorrow, the first year would see colossal works on the south coast. Desalination plants the size of small cities would rise, while solar panel fields covering hundreds of square kilometers would power operations. Crews would excavate deep trenches for a 600-kilometer pipeline to Lake Eyre. The basin would soon fill to 30%, forming a shallow lake visible from space. International media would follow the transformation, while environmental stations tracked soil, humidity, and wildlife. By year 3, salinity would reach critical levels, turning the water a striking turquoise. Industrial salt extraction plants would face their first true test, either proving capable of maintaining balance or exposing a fatal flaw. Advanced systems would run non-stop, filtering water while recovering valuable minerals for export. Meanwhile, weather stations within 100 kilometers would detect consistent shifts in humidity, temperature, and wind patterns, signs that the new sea might be altering the climate. By year 5, microclimate effects would be undeniable. Rainfall within 100 kilometers could rise by up to 15%. Vegetation would respond to greater moisture, desert plants growing larger and more frequently. Migratory birds would redirect toward the new water source. Experimental farms would launch, testing whether increased rainfall and advanced irrigation made crops viable. By year 10, the social and economic changes would be dramatic. Coastal-style cities could grow along the lake, attracting those priced out of Sydney and Melbourne. Powered by renewable energy and designed for sustainable water use, these communities would represent a new model of inland living. Tourism would flourish with resorts, boating, and eco-tourism built around the striking contrast between red desert and blue water. By year 50, the long-term verdict would be clear. The lake might collapse into a hypersaline dead zone, warning against large-scale geoengineering. Or it could stabilize into a new ecosystem with adapted species, proving that human intervention can reshape landscapes sustainably. The outcome would determine whether Australia's inland sea became a model for the future, or its most costly environmental mistake. 5 million years ago, the Mediterranean Sea nearly evaporated during the Messinian salinity crisis, leaving hypersaline lakes and salt deserts. Then the Atlantic Ocean broke through Gibraltar and refilled the basin within 2 years, sparking the biodiversity boom that shaped the Mediterranean ecosystem we know today. Could an Australian inland sea trigger a similar renewal? Theoretically, yes, but with a crucial difference. The Mediterranean refilled naturally, while Australia's version would depend entirely on artificial pumps and human engineering, a fragile system vulnerable to failure. Large-scale artificial lakes have been created elsewhere. Egypt's Toshka lakes were formed in the 1990s using Nile water. Lake Kariba, spanning Zambia and Zimbabwe, remains the world's largest man-made reservoir. These projects prove such feats are possible, but they also require immense maintenance and cause major ecological disruptions. In 2023, some architects proposed futuristic solar-powered cities around a hypothetical Australian sea, self-sufficient hubs surrounded by algae farms producing biofuel, renewable energy systems, and advanced climate control. Engineers would not just be building pipelines but mounting defenses against climate change itself. Yet the technological risks remain enormous. Future breakthroughs could shift the equation. Graphene filters might make desalination vastly cheaper. Industrial-scale salt extraction could turn mineral buildup into a profitable industry. Still, even with such innovations, the project would remain an immense gamble with uncertain outcomes. The greatest obstacle may not be technical but ethical. Lake Eyre or Cautionary is a sacred site for the Arabana people. Flooding would erase cultural connections thousands of years old. As Elder Aaron Stewart explained, our stories are written in this land. You can't drown them. Critics also question spending $200 billion on a speculative mega-project while Aboriginal communities in the region still lack clean water, adequate housing, and health care. Economically, Australia's existing resource wealth raises further doubts. Mining already generates hundreds of billions annually without requiring radical environmental engineering. Why risk everything on an unproven inland sea when smaller, targeted solutions could address water scarcity more effectively? Alternatives include thousands of coastal desalination plants, advanced wastewater recycling, large-scale rainwater harvesting, and drought-resistant crops supported by precision agriculture. These distributed systems would create jobs nationwide, reduce vulnerability to disasters or failures, and allow gradual implementation with real-world adjustments, but without staking the country's future on a single, uncertain gamble. Proponents argue that small, incremental measures cannot address the scale of Australia's climate crisis. They insist the country needs a transformational project, not cosmetic fixes that delay an inevitable catastrophe. Conventional water management has already failed. Decades of conservation, restrictions, and efficiency gains could not prevent major cities from nearing total water loss during recent droughts. The Black Summer fires proved that existing systems are incapable of handling the new climate reality. Supporters say the inland sea offers more than water security. It symbolizes Australia's determination to confront climate change directly. The project could establish the nation as a leader in large-scale environmental engineering, drawing international investment and potentially inspiring similar efforts in drought-stricken regions worldwide. Its psychological power is also significant. After years of watching their continent burn and dry, many Australians see the project as proof that human ingenuity can still reshape the future rather than manage decline. Currently, the proposal is under intensive study. The government has commissioned environmental assessments, feasibility studies, and engineering analyses. Global investors are showing cautious interest, aware of both high risks and potential returns. Environmental groups demand strict safeguards, while indigenous communities insist on cultural protections for Cautionary Lake Eyre. Engineering firms are refining designs that address earlier concerns about salt buildup and ecosystem impacts. A final decision looms. If approved, construction could begin by 2030 with completion around 2050. If rejected, Australia will need alternative strategies to confront escalating drought and water scarcity. The timeline is critical. Climate change is advancing faster than forecasts, and every year of delay raises costs and worsens impacts. The choice before Australia is stark: pursue a bold gamble with global significance, or accept smaller, incremental measures that may prove insufficient. The Australian Inland Sea Project is one of the most ambitious and controversial engineering ideas of our time. It promises to turn desert into water, crisis into opportunity, but the risks are enormous. The Aral Sea disaster stands as a warning of what happens when large-scale environmental engineering fails, and the social, economic, and ecological costs could be catastrophic. Yet inaction may prove even worse. As droughts intensify, water systems collapse, and farmland shrinks, Australia risks becoming increasingly uninhabitable. Cities may be forced toward the coasts, and food imports could replace exports. Success, however, could inspire similar projects in other drought-stricken regions worldwide. The project raises fundamental questions. Should humanity reshape entire ecosystems to survive, or accept safer but limited alternatives? Is bold ambition the answer or dangerous hubris? Whatever the choice, the inland sea debate will define how future generations judge Australia's response to the climate crisis. What do you think? Is this $200 billion gamble humanity's best hope for fighting climate change, or the most expensive mistake in engineering history? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed today's video, please give it a like and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Your support means a lot to us. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. Thanks for being with us. Leave a comment, like to show your support, and remember to hit that subscribe button for more exciting videos. See you next time.